On the 19th of February, 1945, the first landing craft began to cut through the black volcanic sand at the southern tip of Iwo Jima. The Marines were expecting a quiet beach. Instead, they found themselves sinking. The sand was so loose, so volcanic, that men went down to their ankles with every step. The island looked barren. From offshore, like nothing, a piece of rock barely 8 square miles, shaped like a pork chop, sitting 750 miles south-southeast of Tokyo. The intelligence reports had said the Japanese garrison was weak. The generals had said it would fall in 2, maybe 3 days. But as the first waves pushed inland from the beach, silence turned to thunder. And what the Marines discovered over the next 36 days would remake everything the Pentagon thought it knew about fighting the Japanese. This is the story of what the Marines found on Iwo Jima. The man who had built the trap was Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. He was not the kind of general who gave rousing speeches. He was methodical, educated, and ruthless in his preparation. Kuribayashi had studied America. He had read American military manuals. He understood that the Americans would come, and he understood exactly how to make them pay for every inch. Starting in March of 1944, almost a year before the landing, he had ordered his men to dig. They tunneled into the volcanic rock. They drove 17 kilometers of connected tunnels, that is, more than 10.5 miles through the island's interior. They built blockhouses. They installed 750 separate defensive positions. They pre-sighted artillery so that every beach, every ravine, every natural approach was covered. Then they waited. Kuribayashi had given strict orders: no banzai charges, no wasted attacks. The Japanese would stay hidden. They would let the Americans come ashore. And then, when the Marines were crowded on the beaches and moving inland, they would emerge from the tunnels and kill as many as possible. The American planners had asked for 10 days of bombardment before the landing. They wanted to pound the island with bombs and naval gunfire, to smash the defenses into rubble before a single Marine set foot on Iwo Jima. Admiral Blandy gave them 3 days. Bad weather made only 1.5 of those days effective. It was not enough. The bombardment made noise and smoke. Booty barely scratched the tunnels. When the cone shelling stopped, the Japanese simply came back up through the exits, took their positions, and waited. The first Marines hit the beach at 900 hours on the 19th of February, 1945. The volcanic sand defeated them before the bullets did. Amtraks, the Faith, amphibious vehicles thattled the assault, churned uselessly in the sand. Men struggled forward, slipping, exhausted, carrying weapons and ammunition and 60 pounds of gear through dunes that swallowed their feet. For the first hour, the Japanese did not shoot. They let the Marines wade deeper into the sand. They let them stack up on the beaches. They let the confusion grow. Then they opened fire. The first time you hear what a modern artillery piece sounds like, when IDIS aimed directly at you from high ground, at point-blank range, at an angle where you have nowhere to hide and nowhere to run, something breaks in your mind. The Marines called it the fire. The beach, which had seemed barren and empty, erupted. Machine gun fire came from the flanks. Mortar fire came from above. Artillery shells from pre-positioned guns hit the beach in waves. Trucks were blown apart. Men were torn apart. The Marines, who had just landed, began to die. And Kuribayashi had done it. He had forced the fight on his terms. The Marines dug in. They fought. They died. For the first week, the battle raged across the lower part of the island, toward the great black mountain that dominated the southern terrain, Mount Suribachi. The mountain was a strong point. It had to be taken. On the 22nd of February, a patrol of Marines from Fox Company, 280 men total, fought their way to the summit. It took them a day. When they reached the top, they planted a small flag, an American flag, in the volcanic rock. A few hours later, the commanding officer ordered them to replace it with a larger flag, one that men on the other side of the island could see. On that same day, the 23rd of February, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 men raised that second flag. The men were Michael Strank, Harlan Block, Franklin Sousley, Ira Hayes, Rene Gagnon, and John Bradley. They were from Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines. One of them was a Navajo code talker. One of them had been drafted. Most of them were 20 or 21 years old. An Associated Press photographer named Joe Rosenthal happened to be there, camera in hand. He snapped a single photograph as they pulled the flagpole upright. That photograph would become the most reproduced image of the entire war. It would win the Pulitzer Prize. It would inspire the Marine Corps War Memorial, the iconic statue near Arlington National Cemetery that Americans still visit today. But here is what matters for this story. The photograph was taken 4 days into the battle, and the battle was not close to being over. For the men in the photograph, the price was especially high. Michael Strank was killed. 4 days later, Harlan Block was killed. 3 days later, Franklin Sousley was killed. 3 days after that, Ira Hayes survived, but the weight of that fame would destroy him. The battle had taken the 6 flag raisers' men who had done something noble, something that would be seen by millions of Americans, and used them up. That was what Iwo Jima was. It was a machine that consumed people. The Japanese had more than 22,000 men on the island. Most of them were dug in to the north. After Mount Suribachi fell, the battle moved into terrain called Meat Grinder. It was called that for a reason. It was a series of ridges and valleys and fortified positions. The Rock Quarry, Hill 382, Turkey, Knob, the Seti, Amphitheater. Every day was the same. Marines would assault a position. Japanese fire would stop them. They would dig in. At night, Japanese patrols would counterattack. The next day, the Marines would advance another 50 yards, maybe 100 yards, losing men all the time. The Japanese would retreat deeper, losing men too, but always fighting. Always waiting in the next tunnel, the next fortified position, the next prepared defense. A Marine named John Basilone was a gunner sergeant, a Medal of Honor winner from Guadalcanal. His name was already famous in the newspapers. He had gone home on a bond drive, and then he had volunteered to come back to the fighting. On the first day of the battle, while crossing open ground toward the airfield, Basilone and his men came under fire. A Japanese machine gunner opened up on him. Basilone was killed instantly. A Navy corpsman threw his body over his shoulder and carried him back. Basilone had been on Iwo Jima for less than 1 day. The battle ground on. February became March. The days had names. The 24th, the 25th, the 26th. Each day was a repeat of the last. Marines went forward. Men died. The Japanese died too, hundreds of them, then thousands of them. But they would not surrender, and they would not stop fighting. They had their orders. On the 4th of March, something unexpected happened. A B-29 Superfortress, one of the massive new American heavy bombers that had been hitting Japan itself, took damage over Tokyo. It was burning. The pilot, Major Robert Cushman, was flying back toward the ocean, trying to make it back to friendly territory. But the engines were failing. He had 209 men aboard the crew and passengers. He was not going to make it back to any friendly territory. Then someone told him about Iwo Jima, the island had been taken. The airfields could be used. He banked toward Iwo Jima and came in for an emergency landing on the captured airfield. He made it. All 209 men survived. That plane, the first B-29 to land on Iwo Jima, was named Dynamite. That single fact was used to justify the whole battle. By the end of the war, 2,251 B-29 emergency landings would be made on Iwo Jima. 24,000 American airmen would live because the island had been captured. That was the strategic value. That was why the island mattered. That was why the men were dying on the meat grinder. The Japanese mounted their final attack on the night of the 25th of March. It was called a banzai charge, though it was smaller and better organized than the name suggested. 300 men, all that Kuribayashi had left, attacked the American lines. In the darkness, it was desperate, it was hopeless. They killed or wounded more than 100 Americans. But when dawn broke, it was over. The Japanese command, what remained of it, prepared to make a final stand. But the numbers had run out. The tunnels were empty. The men were gone. On the 26th of March, 1945, the island was officially declared secure. The battle had lasted exactly 36 days. The cost was incomprehensible. The Japanese lost approximately 22,000 men killed. Only 216 were taken prisoner. Almost every man chose to fight to the death or hide in the tunnels rather than surrender. The Americans lost 6,800 Marines killed and 18,000 wounded. 1 out of every 3 men who landed on Iwo Jima became a casualty. It was the highest casualty rate in Marine Corps history at the time, and it was, by some measures, the only battle in the entire Pacific War where American casualties actually exceeded Japanese casualties. But the island was taken, the airfields were secure, and, over the course of the war, more than 24,000 American airmen owed their lives to that captured piece of volcanic rock. Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the general who had built the trap, died in the final hours of the battle. He had prepared his own death for months, writing letters to his family, making arrangements. When the end came, he walked out of the tunnels into the dawn, saluted the rising sun, and ordered one of his officers to shoot him. The officer complied. Kuribayashi died, knowing that he had done exactly what he had set out to do. He had made the Americans pay an enormous price for every inch of his island. The battle produced something remarkable. 27 medals of honor were awarded for actions on Iwo Jima. It was the most of any single battle in all of World War II. 5 of those medals were awarded on a single day. The men who fought there became legends before the war was even over, but most of them paid in blood. Most of them died. In 1954, 9 years after the battle, the Marine Corps dedicated the war memorial in Arlington, Virginia. The statue shows 6 men raising a flag. Itis, based on Joe Rosenthal's photograph. It stands there still, and every year, thousands of Americans visit it and stand in the presence of that image, not knowing that 3 of the 6 men in the photograph were dead within days, not knowing the full story of what the Marines found on Iwo Jima, not knowing that 22,000 men refused to be conquered, even when the war was lost, and that they killed 6,800 Americans, making them pay for it. Here is the question that nobody has ever fully answered. Was Iwo Jima worth it? 24,000 airmen lived because the island was taken, but 6,800 Marines died and 18,000 were wounded. Some generals, after the war, said it was pointless, that by that stage of the war, the Japanese Navy was too crippled to defend anything anyway, that the airfields would have been useless, that the battle should never have happened. Others said that without those emergency landings, those 24,000 men would have died in the air over Japan. The mathematics of war, when you put them on a scale like that, never balance. The cost is always paid by young men in the rudder sand. This is why the battle matters. It is why we remember it. Because 22,000 men facing certain death decided to make the Americans bleed for every yard. And because 60,000 more men, knowing what they would face, went forward anyway. That is the story of Iwo Jima, not the flag raising, not the strategy or the generals or the reasons, but the men who went forward and the men who waited in the tunnels. And what? They were willing to pay. What do you think? Should the Marines have taken the island? Or was the cost too high for the gain? I want to hear your opinion in the comments below. This battle showed us that soldiers fight, not because the reasons always make sense, but because that is their duty. They go forward because they are Marines, because they have been ordered to, because the man next to them is going forward. That duty is what matters. Next time, we're going to talk about what happened at Okinawa, the island that came after Iwo Jima. The battle there was even worse. Tens of thousands more men died on the beaches of Okinawa, and that battle made President Truman question whether invading mainland Japan was even possible. The decisions made in those 36 days on Iwo Jima rippled all the way to the atomic bomb. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching.